the most accurate pollster from a battleground state perspective, and that's really what matters now. We don't have a national presidential election, guys. We have 50 state elections. And if you go back to 2016, a big deal is made about what happened with the popular vote, that Trump lost the popular vote by, 2 million votes, except that entire margin is from the state of California. In the other 49 states, Trump won the popular vote by 1.3 million votes. So we don't have a national referendum. We have 50 state elections. So what we should be looking at more than anything else this time of year now are battleground state polls. The most accurate battleground state poll in 2016 was a plucky little outfit from down south that almost no one had heard of until they saw their outlier numbers popping up in the final weeks of the last campaign and just thought, this just must be some GOP shill group. It can't possibly be true because it is so going against the prevailing wisdom. And yet they turned out to nail it. And the guy who is the author, the grand poobah of this polling firm, joins us now. Robert Cahaly from the Trafalgar Group. Robert, my name is Steve Deace. Welcome to The Blaze, brother. How are you?
Oh, it's good to be here. Happy to be on the show.
So, Robert, we're going to have a two-part conversation with you, okay? And the first part, I want to get into just the nuts and bolts without you giving away your proprietary information. But I've got a lot of experience with polling. I've done it. I've analyzed it. I've worked on campaigns. I was a strategist for the Ted Cruz campaign last time around. So I want our audience to know what they can know without you revealing all of your trade secrets about your methodology. And then in the second part, we'll look at how you are specifically applying this and what you're seeing in battleground states around the country. My first question I want to ask you is, Nate Silver made a career out of being right once. He was right in 2012. Right? Giving huge odds that Barack Obama would be reelected when at this stage in 2012, 2 weeks out, the Real Clear Politics polling average had the race tied between Romney and Obama. Not coincidentally, 2 weeks out in 2016, Donald Trump was at 42.3%. That's exactly where he is today, 2 weeks before the election in the RCP polling average. But Nate Silver was adamant, 90% odds Obama was going to win, told the media what they wanted to hear, and ended up being right. Now, he's not been right about a lot since, but he made his career out of that entire moment. How do we know you didn't do that from the right in 2016? What was the key in your methodology that you were able to identify voters that either people didn't look for because it wasn't the narrative they were pushing out from a biased perspective, or they just earnestly couldn't find? How do we know that this is that you can replicate this again in 2020 is my question, really, Robert.
Well, first way you know is I didn't get a big contract with Disney. I don't make tons of money. I don't run in the big time media circuit like that. And that it's not a fluke because it happened again in 2018, especially when the social desirability bias was very prevalent in the Florida U.S. Senate race. And I'm not GOP shill because also in 2018, to the chagrin of most of my Republican friends, I predicted that Tester would win that hotly contested Senate race and that John James would lose in Michigan and Debbie Stabenow would win that hotly contested race, and that Evers would defeat Governor Walker in Wisconsin, and that that the fellow running against Joe Manchin never really had a chance. So those aren't really the things the Republican shield says. And we even got one of them wrong that year that we called for a Democrat and Republican one. So we're different in that we actually do the polling. He runs pretty much an aggregator site that does an average of the polls and then it predicts using that data. And I think his analysis of data is very good. I've always said I think Nate is an exceptional statistician. He just believes that people don't lie to pollsters, and that's where he and I are different. I think that people lie all the time. I think it's hard to even conceive of the fact that in a day and age where, people will lie to their accountant and their doctor and their priest, that suddenly they become honest Abe when they pick up the phone and do a poll. I don't buy it.
Meaning that you can be a great data analyst, but if your data is corrupted, You're just analyzing corrupted data. That doesn't.
That's right.
You can't. I've said before, covering and working on campaigns, no campaign can rise above its own candidate. You can make a candidate better, but that's the water level of a campaign. You cannot rise above the candidate. Campaigns aren't on the ballot. Candidates are. Same thing is when you're an analyst. You can't rise above the quality of your own data. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's eventually going to oink. You cannot get above the data, and that's really the question. Is do you have access to better data than what we see in a lot of these public polls? And you talked about the social, what did you call it? I want to make sure I get the term exactly right, Robert.
Social desirability bias. Social
desirability bias. So, for example, right before we went on the air, at steve@stevedeace.com, I got an email from Monmouth. Now, when I was on the Cruz campaign, Monmouth was one of the few public pollsters we actually respected. All right. So Monmouth sent an email to steve@stevedeace.com asking me to opt in, or asking that email address to opt in for their Iowa poll. That's where I live. Except the email was actually to my wife, Amy. So they sent an email to steve@stevedeace.com asking my wife, Amy, if she would like to opt in and take their poll. Okay. And so I did it just because I wanted to see what their questions were. And that's really well, that's really the question. How do you get that data? Because it seems to me a lot of your premise, I've read a lot about you and your group and a lot of interviews you've given, and it seems that you begin from the premise that that people just don't want to pay the price of the public shaming that's going on in our culture right now if you don't take the leftist narrative on any particular issue, and that's why these pollsters keep getting it wrong. Am I simplifying it too much?
A little bit. I mean, it's that the way they do. I mean, like, we have some fundamental problems with the way they do it. One, I think they ask too many questions. Mm-hmm. If your phone rings at 7:00 on a Tuesday night, when you got children either about to eat or just finishing dinner, you got put kids to bed, you got all kind of, you got dishes to wash, and then the phone rings. I mean, what is it? 1955? We're sitting around the parlor. And we're going to go, oh, hello, it's a political survey. Well, let me sit down and talk to these gents for a while. Right. No, that's ridiculous. And if you tell somebody, hey, this is going to be a short survey, less than 3 minutes of your time, 7 questions, people may hang on for that. But when they start down that path of answering a long survey, you've got 3 things going. You've got them, they're either too conservative because they care too much, they're either too liberal because they care too much, or the worst thing is they're bored and they need somebody to talk to. But none of those 3 represent the average voter. And you're missing average voters with long questionnaires. You're just missing them. Second, we believe in, like I said, a smaller number of questions, but a larger sample size. We don't ever poll a state and give people results with under 1,000. I don't see how you think you're going to poll a state with 600 people. It's ridiculous. 1,000 gets you most of the time under a 3% margin of error. And it gets to the point where even with some weighting, you're not affecting the results that much. The bigger your sample size, as you well know if you've done this, mm-hmm. the less little tweaks even matter. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we believe in a big sample size. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is we believe in lots of different ways of gathering the data. It's not just live calls. It's not certainly auto calls to home lines, which I think are virtually extinct. It's calls to cell phones, it's text, it's emails, it's other digital methods of collecting the data. And we use all of them in whatever combination necessary for a given poll to get the demographic and geographic balance we seek. So to make sure that we get what we need. So we understand in this day and age, you have to work a little harder right now with the number of Republicans or conservatives who refuse to participate in the poll. You've got to work very hard to get a fair representation, because 5-1 people that are Republican and voting for Trump don't want to answer the phone. They literally, the second they go off the phone, just won't participate. I was going to ask you about that because I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm sure Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, everybody else here at The Blaze would say the same thing. I am inundated in my inbox, Robert, with viewers and listeners here to Blaze TV who say, I refuse to talk to these pollsters, or if I do answer,
I want to discredit them because I know this media hates me. So I give them answers opposite of what I'm actually going to do, just so we can further discredit them on election day. And I don't know, anecdotal evidence, obviously it's not necessarily of a scientific basis, but it can be a confirmation of an application of one, provided you don't have confirmation bias. So how much of that is a real thing when you quantify it in your own methodology? How much of that is a real thing with right of center voters, that they either refuse to respond to these people, or when they do, they actively seek to discredit them by not even answering truthfully?
Well, I can't really speak to the actively seek to discredit, but what I can speak to is the ratio. It started out in most of the states at 4-to-1 refusal. Now it's 5-to-1. And also in discussion with others.
Can you explain to our audience? Pardon me. I want our audience to understand what that means. It means you've got to work 5 times harder to identify the vote in on one side of the electorate than you do the other. Can you, right? That's what that means. You got to.
That's exactly what it meant. So let's say if we wanted to reach 25 Democrats, okay, then to reach 25 Democrats, whatever the number of calls was, let's say it took 400 calls to reach 25 Democrats. All right. So what you need to do is now you need to consider that is going to be 5 times that. So that
wow.
would be 2,000 calls to reach the same amount of Republicans, because they just refuse to participate. Once they realize it's a poll, I mean, you've got the right number. You've got the right person. They're just not going to do it. They refuse to participate. So what you have is pollsters who they start out saying, hey, we balanced our universe that they're calling from. So they create a pool of numbers of people they're going to call, and they balance the pool to make sure they're, a proper amount of Republicans, proper amount of Democrats, proper amount of each ethnic group, proper amount of each educational level, each geographic, all the things you would use to balance. And then they start and they randomly dial. Well, they're automatically setting themselves to not get enough Republicans, because it's not about balancing the universe you start with. It's about balancing your results and making sure you get each group represented well. And that's why we go through it. Like the first night, we go through and get everything we can, and then we go back and we say, where are our holes? Where are we short? We didn't get enough of this group. We didn't get enough of that group. We didn't get enough people who fit. And so we are constantly using whichever method it takes to get to our balanced sample, because we want to wait as little as possible. So what these guys are doing is they'll underrepresent Republicans. And worse, the people they do get on the phone that are Republicans are the ones who want to talk to a pollster, which are the ones who are the never Trump types. So although there are only like 8 or 9% of the Republicans who answer the poll, they want to participate. So then all of a sudden they overrepresent the people they reach. And then when they don't get enough Republicans, they weight up that number. So they're weighting up a sample that's already skewed.
Other than that, they have a wonderful singing voice. So you're saying there's a chance. See, I think it's important for our audience, because I've walked them through some of what you're saying. The 5-to-1 rejection number is, astounding. That's the first time our audience has heard this. But our audience is probably more sophisticated on this than most, just because of my own experience covering and being a part of campaigns at this level, that I like to walk them through the inside baseball on this, because frankly, I think a lot of what they get told in the media as conservatives is false, even from a place like, frankly, Fox News. I think the entire operation is to show conservatives they really don't have any influence in the process, where I think the data says the exact opposite is true when it's presented accurately. And so I wanted them to walk through some of your methodology. They've probably heard, I've got a break here in about a minute, but the question that you guys asked in 2016 that other people are now ripping off, well, hey, you got this one friend, right? The one friend who's got an itch down there. It's not you, but it's a one friend. The one friend who's going to vote for Trump. You won't, but tell us about your friend, right? We got about 30 seconds. You did a lot of that in 2016. Are you doing that again in 2020?
Well, it wasn't the friend. It was called the neighbor.
The
question.
neighbor,
It
yes.
says, who would you say most of your dating for?
Yeah. And that makes people feel free to be more honest when they don't have to embrace that stigma themselves.
What they really think. It lets them project what they really think.
Yeah.
And it lets them project what they really think. It's a technique I learned a long time ago. I don't steal stuff from people, so I will tell you, the man's deceased, but his name was Rod Sheila. He was a great American, and I learned a lot from him. So I learned from him. Now, some of the scurrilous people who work for Fox News polling, they use the neighbor question without giving proper credit.
I'm glad you went there. So when we come back after the top of the hour, I want to ask you about a fascinating dynamic in the latest Fox poll where they used your question. And they didn't understand how to use it. That's what it seemed like to me. And then there were the historical context that is lacking in a lot of these polls. And then the voter registration numbers. So I want to get into that with you when we come back here. Robert Cahaly is here with us from Trafalgar Group. They nailed the battleground state polling in 2016, and we're finding out what they think in 2020. Can they replicate their accuracy and success? We'll get into that more here on the other side on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast next. And we're back with Hour 2, live and on demand here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. Steve at stevedeace.com is how you can email us, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Steve Deace Show, over on Parler at Steve Deace. Check out our new YouTube channel at youtube.com/Steve Deace as well. If you're a podcast listener, thank you very much. Whether it is Amazon Music, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you podcast the show from, if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button for us, leaving us a 5-star review if you haven't done that already, because the more of those we get, the more it helps the show to grow. We want to thank all of you that have done those two things as part of our podcast family already. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, Dr. Scott Atlas will be joining us from the White House Coronavirus Task Force. He'll be a special guest for this week's segment of Fake News or Not, as we try to separate the panic from the real concern when it comes to the latest with COVID-19. Hey, did you know the average American has about 97 points that they can add, almost 100 basically, that they can add to their credit score, but has no idea how to access them because the banks own and hold all that information, and they're not always the most forthcoming. Well, that's where ScoreMaster comes in. It's the new credit science that will help you super boost your credit score. What do we mean super boost? Well, the average ScoreMaster user can raise their score about 60 points in about 20 days. Why? Because they empower you with that information. Here, they will show you, walk you through, hey, here's exactly why your score is where it's at. And then here's exactly what you can do to get your score to where you want it to go and how long it will take you to get there. They empower you with the information that may be the difference between getting approval for that car, home loan, business loan, or getting a better interest rate as well. Heck, a lot of employers nowadays are doing credit checks as part of their backgrounds as well. So enroll in minutes and take back control over your life and finances with ScoreMaster. See how many plus points ScoreMaster can add to your score when you visit scoremaster.com/Steve. Again, head over to scoremaster.com/Steve. Let's welcome back Robert Cahaly here from the Trafalgar Group. They were the most accurate battleground state pollster in 2016. And we're talking about how they did it and whether that methodology can then replicate itself in 2020. He's already pointed out it did pretty well in 2018. In what was a much more of a mixed year where Republicans lost 40 House seats, but ended up holding on to the Senate. And in a little bit, we're going to take a look at some of his numbers for 2020. And Robert, before we left, we talked about the Fox News' latest poll. And when I walked my audience...
I was just talking about their pollsters. I don't even pay attention to their polls anymore.
Okay, well, I want to tell you what's in their latest poll, and I want to get your take on it as a professional, all right? Because if you were our campaign pollster, and I was a senior strategist on a campaign, and you brought me this poll before we took it to the candidate, I'd be like, how are these things simultaneously true? Because the latest Fox News poll showed that Biden was widening his lead on their top line. But then it also showed a widening gap of people in the same survey that actually believe Trump is going to win instead. Because I'd want to know, how do you know those people told you the truth? How are those two things simultaneous? So what you're telling me is that your voter file was full of people that are either bipolar or that lied to you? Because those two assumptions can't be simultaneously true. They're either schizophrenic or false. Am I wrong in that analysis, Robert?
Well, they could also be paranoid, in which they think that they are against Trump, but everyone else is against them and for Trump. Mm-hmm. Let's consider the paranoia possibility.
Okay, that's the one. I agree. Yeah.
But what I think is more the possibility is that people are projecting when they answer the question, because people, I mean, you guys are with the Blaze. You know what I'm talking about. The punishment of people for being conservative is just unmeasured right now.
Hey, we're fighting social media fact checkers that are trying. We're the second largest conservative media company on this continent next to Fox. They're trying to demonetize us and deplatform at least somebody on our platform, me, Beck, Crowder, somebody, every day that ends in Y. So you betcha we know what you're talking about, Robert. You bet we do.
So in this environment, where people are being doxxed, they're being attacked, all these things are happening. We're supposed to believe that people are just going to remain comfortable with expressing a view that is outside, what is looked at positively. I mean, let's just say, for example, a person just thinks the whole mask thing is a joke, thinks it's stupid, they don't really take the coronavirus seriously. I mean, let's say that person exists. It's one thing for them to think that and tell a few of their close friends that. But do you think they tell a stranger that on the phone? Of course they don't, because they will be judged for saying such a thing. It's like if you poll a room of 100 people, say, does anybody watch Jerry Springer? You'll get almost no one who says yes. But if you went back and you checked their little Nielsen boxes, I bet you there's a percentage of them that do.
One of the things I also talk about with our audience a lot, Robert, is you have to acknowledge some historicity in your polling. There's always outliers, paradigms change, right? But if I could take all of the public polling and fashion it into one narrative, here's what it says. The big media public polling, I should say. Here's what it says 2 weeks out before the election. It says that Joe Biden, at a minimum, is a stronger candidate at this stage than Barack Obama was in 2008, when he had the largest Democratic presidential victory since LBJ in 1964, that he is on par with FDR's final re-election campaign in 1944. It says that on one end, and then on the other end it says that Donald Trump is going to challenge Herbert Hoover for the lowest percentage of the popular vote by an incumbent president when it's only a two-man race since the dawn of the two-party era post-Civil War. That's the meta-narrative of these public polls. And I just don't see, it doesn't mean that Biden won't win. I just don't see how either one of those is true when I look at everything else that dictates to me what the environment of an election is. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I like I said, the thing that I think is the most at play in this entire election is the social desirability bias. And the reason people are so off is this old-fashioned sticking to strictly live callers. I mean, this is, the gold standard of this, and they don't want that to change because the barrier to entry starts getting really cost-effective when you look at other options besides live callers. And now these guys can't charge exorbitant rates for what I believe at this point to be pseudoscience, and so they've got to defend, this sacred cow with everything they have. But the problem is, people lie to people. Mm-hmm. The more anonymous someone is, the more anonymous they feel they are when they give their opinion, the more honest they are. So a lot of these people really believe these things are right. But, every one of us knows somebody, most of us know tons of people who are for Trump. They've told us, but they don't tell anybody where they work. They certainly don't put it on social media, and because they don't want the grief. I know people that live in neighborhoods with other Trump supporters with signs in front of their house who say, there's that one guy in the neighborhood who always just kind of looks kind of nasty and gets mad about politics, and I just, they tell me, I just don't want to put a Trump sign in my yard because I don't feel like having that guy mad at me. And that's duplicated all over the country.
I mean, I didn't vote for Trump last time. I didn't think he'd be a good president. He's turned out to be better than I thought. So I'm going to vote for him for sure this time. I know all kinds of conservatives like me that didn't vote for Trump 4 years ago. I don't, and are going to do it now. I don't know any of them that did 4 years ago and aren't going to do it now. When I looked at Rasmussen had the most accurate national poll in 2016. About 2 weeks ago, they forecasted that Trump was going to lose 12 points of Republican support. That one out of every 4 Republican voters was not going to vote for Trump. That would be the lowest ratio. I went and looked. That would be the lowest ratio since George Herbert Walker Bush challenged Taft for the worst finish by an incumbent president ever when they both had credible third-party candidates. Bush got 73% of the Republican vote. Trump doesn't have a Ross Perot. Trump's a hell of a lot more popular with his base. He didn't divide his base over no new taxes and start a civil war in his party the way Herbert Walker Bush did in his presidency. The idea that Trump was going to lose 12 points of Republican support, I could not believe Rasmussen even published that. Am I wrong about that, Robert?
Well, I'm generally complimentary of most of their work, but I realize it's a lot to be out on the limb. It's a lot. I know it's a lot because people tell me every day, man, you're out there all by yourself, man. It should be a lot easier if you just look close to what everybody else says. You wouldn't have to, you wouldn't have to face all this attention and possible scorn if you get it wrong. And I'm like, but then I wouldn't be standing up for what I think is the truth. So, everybody's got to run their own business in the way they think is best for business. I get that, and I understand that. I just feel like, I don't think that's their best work. I think they're capable of better than that.
Let's look at the future. I've been walking my audience through these voter registration numbers. And the other day, I walked them through an experience I had with the Cruz campaign here in Iowa. So while I was working on the Cruz campaign, I was still doing a daily show here as well at the time. And I was like the only media member in America that predicted Ted Cruz to win Iowa. And it wasn't because I worked for the campaign. The reason people don't like me is I just want to know what the truth is, even if it's not what I want to be true. And I'll tell you what I think the truth is, even if it's not rah, rah, go team. That's why I don't have a lot of friends, frankly. But the reason why I thought Cruz was going to win is because I knew voter registration data that the media did not know, that there was a massive movement happening in Iowa to get churchgoers who had never voted before to come out and vote in the caucuses for the most principled candidate. If they've never had a chance to or never done that before. And of course, I knew that messaging was going to play to my candidate. And so everybody saw that we were going to have this huge amount of new voters in Iowa and just assumed it was Trump with his persona bringing new people to the process. And that was some of it. But on caucus night, 45% of the people that voted in Iowa had never voted in a caucus before. Cruz actually won that group and ended up winning the caucuses. And I pointed out to my audience that is new information that probably wasn't included in any call to Iowa that Monmouth made or Quinnipiac made. They probably didn't even know about that because we weren't broadcasting that on the Cruz campaign at the time. We didn't want the other campaigns to know what we were doing. And I wonder how much of that kind of a dynamic is being missed by these pollsters when you look at the GOP voter registration trend in these battleground states and across the country. I look at Florida, for example. Last week, Quinnipiac came out and said that Biden was going to win Florida by double digits. Now, keep in mind, they said DeSantis was going to lose by 7 points in 2018. He's governor now. They said Biden was going to win a state where the average margin of victory in the last 7 presidential elections is 2.5 points. He was going to win it by double digits, and yet since 2008, Republicans have erased over 70% of the Democratic voter registration in the state, the advantage they had. How is that? That's not mathematically possible, what Quinnipiac is asserting.
Of course not. Of course not.
So how much of this voter registration information are they missing, do you think, Robert?
Well, I don't think it's, here's the thing. I think we all need to acknowledge there is an agenda to most of the polling we see out there. There is an agenda. The agenda, I think, through the summer has succeeded in giving Democrats running for U.S. Senate and the Biden campaign a tremendous financial advantage. I'm going to call out. I think a lot of these guys are looking the other way and putting stuff out there that they know is not their best work. Because in the end, what was the punishment for getting it wrong in 2016?
Nothing. Yeah.
There wasn't one.
Right.
So the thing is, if there's no punishment for getting it wrong, consider they didn't get it wrong.
They just got to blame Russia for 3 years. They just got to do that for 3 years. Just blame Russia.
Yeah. No, but consider that they didn't get it wrong, but their goal was to move an electorate,
right,
instead of reflect an electorate. So in many ways, they're trying to get it more effective than it was last time. And I can't speak to, which group is where. I don't really know anything about why Quinnipiac would be the way they are, but I do know that there is what's called in polling a concept of herding, which is everybody puts out kind of the same numbers and they feel like there's safety in the herd.
Right.
And obviously, I guess I'm a black sheep or the lost lamb because I just seem to avoid the herd like the plague. But, I see what's going on, and I just, nothing, it doesn't make sense. I don't buy into it, but I think that if you are believing that the people that you speak to are always telling you the truth, you could really be way off on this.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be so far off. It's just, it's not relevant. I mean, I always give the story of when you approach the toddler with a face full of crumbs and ask him, "Did you eat the missing cookies?" He's doing a calculation. Well, if you're asking, it means you don't know that. He's going to give you the answers that are going to get him in the least trouble. He's not focused on the truth right now. And I don't think it gets better as you get older.
What you're defining is something we talk a lot about on our show. That's the worldview battle going on in the culture. You're admitting human nature is flawed. And so you're factoring that reality into your assumptions. The progressive worldview begins with the premise that human nature is basically good, and that's why we can achieve utopia. So they're just going to assume everybody's telling them the truth, and everything's a Pleasant Valley Sunday and hunky-dory. That's kind of what I hear you saying a little bit.
That's exactly right, because nobody taught that toddler how to lie.
So your forecast of where things stand. Donald Trump right now has the exact same percentage in the Real Clear Politics polling average 2 weeks before Election Day, 42.3%, that he had back in 2016. Investors'
Are you
business.
talking about the nationwide?
Yeah, the nationwide poll. Yeah. So when you look at your battleground state stuff, what's the trend line you're seeing here in the final 2 weeks right now?
I'm seeing all the negative trends that came from the perceived hypocrisy of the Republicans putting a Supreme Court nominee up and pushing it through and not letting Obama do it, and all their contrary statements were working against them. That's gone because people love Amy Coney Barrett. I'm seeing the impact of Trump going out and giving all these speeches and just basically destroying these little towns with earned media. I mean, just leveling them, and like a bomb went off with so much attention. These small newspapers, TV stations, all that kind of stuff, with very little content, just giving them all the content they can handle. I'm seeing him moving the ball there. So I see all this stuff moving in the right direction, and I will stand by. I think the lowest I expect to see Trump is in the high 270s, but I think it's only up from there. I don't think Florida's in dispute. I think he'll win Florida. I think obviously Georgia and Texas. I don't know why people are talking about that. North Carolina, I think, is going to stay Republican this year, and I think Arizona is too. So after that, all he needs is either Pennsylvania or Michigan or Minnesota or a combination of Wisconsin and Nevada. And so that's 4 paths to victory right there.
I agree with your analysis. That was the map I gave our audience yesterday, that if people had to vote today, I think a couple of points of people that are annoyed with his pestering, immature behavior at the last debate in places like North Carolina and Arizona, I think would come home, because I agree with what Frank Luntz said last week, which is people that are undecided don't like Trump's personality and don't like Joe Biden's policies. I agree with that. But I left those Rust Belt states.
They also
Go ahead.
care about leadership.
Yeah.
They also care about leadership. I mean, what you just said is exactly right. They care about leadership, and they really, they can talk about how much they don't like Trump, But when that husband and wife sit down and have that conversation about what's best for their children and their economic future and their 401k and their lifestyle, they're not for a market crash and more lockdowns. I can promise you that.
I completely agree with you. When I did my little map, though, I kept all those Rust Belt states. I grew up in Michigan. I know that state well. My assistant, Todd, that you've been talking to, he grew up in Wisconsin, knows that state well. We are a neighboring state of Minnesota. We know that state well. Pennsylvania's been the Republican Party's white whale since the 80s, and Trump cracked the code. Those Democratic governors in those states, I think the cheating that is going to go on, I think is unlike. I think all four of those states are going to be Cuyahoga County, Ohio. That's what I think. Okay, and so am I too paranoid? And then how does that factor into your analysis?
Well, I get worn out from people for saying this, but if you read the National Review article yesterday and a few other interviews, you know this. I think Pennsylvania is the number one state that Trump is likely to win and lose because of voter fraud.
Mm-hmm.
I think, however, his margin in Michigan may be enough that it won't matter. So I really feel very good about Michigan because I think Michigan's the one place that the U.S. Senate candidate is really a absolute plus.
John James, you're talking about. Yeah, he's an impressive individual.
He is a plus for the president, too, though. In states where the Senate candidate is kind of dragging him down a little bit, this is the state where the Senate candidate is helping expand avenues. So I think that, I think voter fraud is a real thing, but I expect it to affect Pennsylvania more than anywhere else.
Robert, how can our audience, thank you for being generous. I know we kind of asked you at the last minute here on the fly to spend more time with us. I've really enjoyed it. I hope they did. Thank you for that. How can our audience follow you guys' work now from this time forward? What's the best way?
Okay, just Robert Cahaly, Cahaly is my Twitter handle, and almost everything that's what we update the most and the most regularly, and we at this point are probably going to put a poll out every other day, and some days we'll be doing two. So got a lot of other information we're putting out. So we'd love to have you follow us and stay in touch, and we'll see what happens. But I think it's going to be a big surprise on Election Day for a lot of folks.
We are going to bug you again, man. Maybe see if we can grab you for a few minutes the Monday, the day before the election. I've really enjoyed having you on. I've been following your work with keen interest and closely. Robert, thanks for your time today, brother. God bless you. All right, take care.
All right, take care. Y'all too.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.